Craft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner, as always. And today, super excited to have Nisha Tuli on the show with me to talk about all kinds of stuff. But Nisha, the when I create these live streams, it makes me give it a title. And I was thinking, what am I going to call this? And I said, you know, um, taking your hobby to a career, and I thought that would be a great place to start anyway, because you have been a writer for quite a while and pursuing publication. You have a series that is self-pubbed and also pursuing traditional publishing, and you've got lots of news going on. So first off, welcome to the show. Thank you for
Thank you.
joining today. And let's start with a fun question just to
Okay.
get things going. What is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Ooh. It's not like one of those things that I like grew up being like, I want to be a writer, like so many people are.
Yeah.
And I always loved books. I always loved reading, but like I was grew up in a house where you became a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer. Like those were the acceptable careers. And I finished high school and I went to engineering school. And that's what I did in university. And I don't know. I decided like I had moved to a new city. I didn't know anybody.
Yeah.
And I was like looking for stuff to do. And I was like, I'm going to take a creative writing class. What the hell? And I then learned about like this 2-year program at this nearby college that like focuses on writing and journalism and all that kind of stuff. And I was
Yeah.
like, maybe I kind of want to do that. So I applied and then like I got in, and that was sort of when I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to be a writer now. But it was like, but it was more like at that time, it was more just like journalism. I worked for some magazines, I worked for some newspapers, that kind of thing. Like, idea, and then the idea of writing a book was always in the back of my head, but like I just didn't know if I knew how to do that.
I there's been lots of talk about the whole right brain, left brain dichotomy, and I don't know that I fully embrace or endorse that there are strict divisions of, there are certain people that are right brain, left brain, whatever. But I do think that there's something to it, at least, where the analytical side, and some people very much tend to lean that way, and some people are more creative, and I don't know where I fall there. But do you, someone that went to engineering school and comes from a family who very much put value on those types of pursuits, um, how do you feel about that, the creative side as opposed to the more analytical, the science, of it all?
I feel like I might fall like right in the middle. Like I
Yeah.
don't know because like I remember being in creative communications, which was the program I mentioned, like, and everyone would joke about how nobody could do math. And I was like, well, I can actually do math. That's not actually like,
Loser.
and yeah, I think like for me, and having that analytical side helps me with the creative side. Like it lets me
Yeah.
be organized, and especially with like self-pubbing and having to keep on top of like the 1,001 things you
Oh
have to
yeah.
do when you're an indie author. Like I think all of that helps keep me organized, and like you need to look at data and numbers and
Right.
money and all that kind of stuff. So I think like that really gives me a bit of a leg up over like the people who just want to create, which like I get, you just want to write, but I actually really enjoy all the other parts of it too, and the stuff you do need to analyze. So yeah, I think maybe I got lucky and I enjoy both sides and have a bit of both brains going.
Well, speaking of that, the the Kindle revolution 12, or about a dozen years ago. I don't know exactly when all that happened, and that really kind of kicked off the indie publishing revolution. And, we talk a lot about the gatekeepers of traditional publishing, and indie publishing allowed, people to bypass those and to get their stories out. And so many amazing stories of people that have found an audience, and all of that great stuff. There's, you know We talk a lot about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that we tend to kind of dismiss traditional publishing because we do now have these other opportunities. And sometimes you can go too far the other way, and you're forgetting this whole segment of publishing and of book culture. And it's kind of, we actually find ourselves in an interesting place now where indie publishing has matured, and it's very much a viable opportunity for people. But it also comes with a lot of headaches, and a lot of the things that people were griping about traditional publishing have kind of seeped over to indie pub now. There's, it's harder and harder to get yourself noticed. It's, there's lots and lots of competition, and you you kind of quietly wish for some gatekeepers to help,
Yeah,
sort things out in the indie world.
yeah.
Where do you find yourself? Because you do have a series that you're indie pubbing, but you also have two series that you're now publishing with traditional publishers.
Yeah,
Do I have that
yeah.
right?
Yeah, you do have that right. Yeah, so I guess when I first started, like, so I'm like one of those annoying people who decided to write a book during COVID. It was
Oh
that
yeah,
first summer, and I was like, you know what? I'm not getting any younger. I keep thinking about this. I finally had time. Like, I have two young kids. Suddenly, all the like, my husband travels a lot. Like, suddenly he was home. We didn't have activities every night. I wasn't in the office every day. Um, so I started writing a book, and I like the first thing I didn't really consider indie publishing. I really hadn't read many indie books at that point. I didn't really know much about it. I just like knew what was at the bookstore, and that's what I
yeah,
wanted. So I set out to be traditionally published, and I queried for an agent that after I finished that book that fall, and I signed with someone in the early 2021, like in January, and went out on submission and all that jazz and stuff. But like it was taking forever. And then like the more I started like exploring things, the more I was like, kind of, I wanted to write fantasy romance, which like did not feel like a genre that traditional publishing was interested in at that moment. They were not buying books like that. And I was like, well, I'm pretty fast. Like, and as I was writing, I just kept writing more and more books. And suddenly I had like 7 unpublished books. And I was like, well, what am I going to do with all of these? So that's when I decided to like throw it out there and be like, well, maybe I'll try indie publishing too, like with the knowledge that like I had a little bit of money I could spend on nice covers and like on
right.
all the things that you need to be successful at indie publishing. And then yeah, so now it's sort of like become two sides of the coin. I mean, the one pub deal I got was because someone had read one of my indie books, an editor, and he liked it and he approached me and was like, hey, what are you working on? We're starting this new imprint. Are you interested in working with us? So like one has begot the other. And even with my self-pub series, I've now gotten lots of interest from like foreign publishers who want to do translations and stuff, which is sort of like now marrying the two, because like there's no reason for me not to sell a book in Spanish because I don't sell very many, right? Like most of my audience is in the US, so like there's no reason.
Right.
Why not translate it and like try to expand that audience, right? So that's sort of, I'm sort of in the middle of all that right now.
Wow. It's there are maybe more hurdles to getting your books out there, but there are also more tools
Yeah,
that are
yeah.
available
And I
to
think like the
authors.
perception of indie has changed so much, even just in the
Right.
last 2 years. And like now, Trad Pump wants romantasy. Now they're all over it. 2 years later, they are all jonesing for it. So
Isn't that
sometimes you just
wild?
got to wait for your moment, right? Like you write what you like and to market as much as you can, but like sometimes you just have to wait for your moment to come. And now they're all interested. So like
Right.
it's
Well, speaking of those tools that are available to everyone now, but writers are especially taking advantage of them. One of those is TikTok, and you really found an audience on TikTok.
yeah, yeah.
What was
I
kind of
mean,
walk through that a little bit, because some people are like, TikTok books. What?
TikTok.
I thought
I
that was all dance
know. I was like,
videos.
TikTok. I'm gonna go on TikTok. I'm like, I'm too old for TikTok. But there was like, yeah, I don't know. But then I was starting to like, I was starting to gear up to be like, okay, I'm gonna indie publish. And actually, the first thing I published was a novella because I was just like, I had written this short little novella. I was gonna use it as a newsletter magnet to start. I worked in marketing for a long time too, so like I know all these like other things to do, like to try and help. So I was going to use it for newsletter. I made a video on TikTok that went viral and like just exploded, and that just like set me off. I ended up getting like 8,000 newsletter subscribers, and like it was a couple of weeks before I was going to publish it. So I ended up throwing it up on Amazon because like people were like, I wanted to try and capitalize on it, and that like people were buying it, and that really worked out. And I mean, that long tail on that, I mean, that was over a year ago. People still buy that book very like regularly, and I still get newsletter signups for that. So like it really does. And I mean, obviously I kept posting more things and stuff like that, and had a few more that did well. And then recently one that like a book talker was the one who like her video went viral about my book. And I mean, like that's even more the end game, really, right? Like I mean, that's why Colleen Hoover's so popular, is because everyone's talking about her, like talking about her books, not her talking about them, which has always been my goal, is to try and get the books into the right hands, and with the hope that someone is going to fall in love enough and their video is going to go viral. And then so like that actually happened in March, and that really, oh boy, that really changed things.
Have you always been a fan of fantasy?
Yeah, I've always been a big fantasy fan. Yeah, absolutely. And it was when when I first started really digging into fantasy romance, that when I was like, oh, this is what I've been looking for. Like, because, you know, I read literary stuff and I'm like, I'm not smart enough to write literary stuff like this. And then I started reading fantasy romance. So like, oh, this is what moves me. Like, this was the moment where I was like, oh, now I get what I want to write. Like, and that was just the catalyst to just be like, sit down and start.
Yeah. For so long, fantasy was very Eurocentric. Fantasy. If you told someone I'm reading or writing a fantasy novel, the assumption was, okay, this is like 12th century England inspired,
whatever.
Right. And the last few years, especially, and I think this has always been the case, that there are fantasy books and series that are inspired by other cultures. And I know that I heard you say one time that that writing the type of fantasy that you do, and please correct me if I'm misquoting you, that it helped you to connect with your heritage in a way that, anyway, did I get that right? That
you did. So like the series that is coming out in September is fantasy romance, but it's not Eurocentric. It's based on South Asian world building and myth and lore and that kind of thing. And that was like that was the first book I wrote originally back in 2020. And it's gone through a huge overhaul since, because then I went, after the publisher bought it, I went back to read it and I was like, whoa, man, this sure was my first book. Sure learned a few things, which is good. I mean, that's good, right? The goal is to get better as you keep doing things. So,
right.
So I basically like rewrote the whole thing from top to bottom. But so that was, for me, that was really fun. It was sort of like exploring like I grew up in Canada, so like I don't have a strong connection to my culture. I'm biracial, so like it's just my dad's side. So like there's always been that little bit of missing piece. So it was really fun to be able to explore some of these stories and just weave them in and sort of make them my own. So that like that series will have sort of that same thing that everyone loves about fantasy romance, but from like on a completely different like aesthetic to it, which is kind of fun. And then even in my other series, like it's got the more Eurocentric world building, but like the main character is brown. Like instead of the same blonde girl you find in every one of these series, right? Like It's just right. And like the way that people have responded to that has been really fantastic. Like especially like other brown girls who are like, wow, I like never get to see this. Like usually it's just like side characters who are, and I'm like, yeah, no, like it's like really cool to be able to, just because I can, it's fantasy and it can be whatever it wants to be.
Well, and that's the great thing about fantasy is that, most of the fantasy that we're familiar with echoes the real world in I guess in ways that help you connect with stories and characters. But just because it's always been done that way.
And I remember I had a beta reader be like, well, where is she from? You keep mentioning that and I'm like, well, she's from this made up place that's in the book, just like all the other people. Like, what do you mean, where is she from? Like, it's just, a bit of a mind shift for some people.
Yeah, that's
She's from the same place all these other people are. Like,
right, right. So, but because it is fantasy, it's a made up world,
right.
but it's influenced, flavored by real places, real cultures.
Yeah.
How do you how do you mine the 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 myths and some of the stories that then could help you build your world, your characters, your magic systems, even?
I'm very like pick and choose what I like. Like
Yeah,
I don't believe in the anachronism of like this couldn't have existed then. I'm like, then what? Like didn't ever exist, right? Like
right,
they don't, if I can have dragons and magic, then they can have running showers also, right? Like there's sort of
right, fact,
like
right,
what, it's funny to me how sometimes that seems to be people's like, well, they wouldn't have that. Like why not though? Like he wrote a dragon here. Like why is that more believable than like, so yeah, even with like the Heart of Night and Fire, which is the South Asian one, like I make a point of putting a note at the front just because I already anticipate what people are going to say, that like I borrowed from different cultures and different time periods, and like because to suit the plot, basically, like I like to pick things that like I don't world build beforehand. I'm a total pantser. I will write the story and then I will build the world to suit the plot in whatever way I need it to work for me.
I love that idea. Build the world to suit the plot. That's I as a pantser who is not necessarily worried in the beginning about the world building. Do those things go hand in hand? You know, most fantasy authors will spend months and months
I
world
know.
building and you know writing out these long treatises of you know politics and religion and all of this that may never find its way into the book, but it helps set that world
Yeah.
in their mind. Um, you don't approach
I don't have
storytelling
the
that way,
patience. I don't have the patience for that. Like to me, I don't care about the plumbing system or the political like unless it's important to the story, I
right?
probably am not going to worry too much about it. Like this is why I don't write historical anything, because I don't want to do the research. Like I'm way too lazy to do that. I don't want to get it wrong. But yeah, like to me, my like for me world building is not the point. Like I prefer like to focus on the characters and the relationships. Like the world building is the backdrop versus, you know, like some fantasy, yeah, where you're reading like Tolkien, where he obviously spent like millions of, which we all know, spent tons of hours forming his world.
Right.
I think that my stuff's more like about the characters and the world building is fun and that kind of thing, but that is, it's just created to suit what I needed to suit instead of like knowing. If someone were to ask me something very in depth, I probably would have to make it up on the spot. I don't know. Or I'd be like, I don't know.
Yeah,
I'll think about it.
it is what it is.
Yeah, and I've noticed too, like, and I think that's one thing with fantasy romance. I feel like that's how it differs a little bit from the more traditional strain of fantasy, is that there is a bit. I mean, it depends. Some of them, in some cases, not so much, but I do know that some people are like, it's not enough world building for me. I'm like, well, you're never going to get super, so maybe I'm not the writer for you then. Like, I don't know what to tell
Right.
you. Yeah.
Right. So what are the differentiations between traditional fantasy and fantasy romance? Other than the obvious, is it more relationship based as opposed to where a traditional fantasy might be more anchored in the world building or the magic system?
Yeah,
Does
I mean, a
fantasy
little
romance focus
bit.
more on the relationships?
I mean, a little bit. I think in my case it does. Like, I think. I mean, I don't know if that's fair either. I mean, there's still romance and regular fantasy and stuff
Sure.
too, but
Good fantasy anyway.
yeah.
Good.
I mean, if, you know,
Should be a romance in all good fiction, it seems like, because that's real life.
it is. I mean, I don't disagree with that, but not everyone
Yeah.
might agree with that. I mean, I guess because like in fantasy romance, the central relationship is a huge part of the plot, right? Like if you took that out, there would be no story left. Versus like, I think in traditional, if you took that out, then you could still hang it on like there. And then it differs from more traditional romance in that there is still a big plot going on. So it's not exactly the same as like more genre romance in that sense, where it's really just focused on the couple. So it sort of seems to like straddle the line, like in the rom-com that you mentioned, like it's it's about them, right? Like there's a bit of a B plot, but it's mostly about them, right? So it's a bit different in that regard.
So we have the series that you're indie publishing, and then that led to a traditional publisher wanting you to write a series for them. When does that series come out?
So that's the one, the Indian one. So that will become, the first book comes out in September, mid-September, and the second one in February, I think. Yeah. And then there will be 4 books in that series, and they'll be done by the end of 24. They're actually a fast publisher, so it's kind of nice in that regard because they focus a lot on digital. So they move a little quicker than some of the other behemoths than my rom-com publisher. That is, the book's not coming out till 2025, even though I got the offer in 2022. But whatever, it's fine. I've got a lot going on. I did not need to be worried about another book right at this moment, anyways.
So, what are some of the what are some of the truisms, things that maybe you had assumed about traditional publishing, and then when you got into a contract situation, they're absolutely true. But the contrast, what are some things that are assumptions that people make that now that you're on the inside, you go, oh, that's not how that works at all.
Oh man, how long have you got? Like,
as long as you need.
I mean, I feel like people think you're like instantly rich if you like are publishing a book, right? Like we're not all Stephen King, unfortunately. Maybe one day, but not yet. I think like for me, the big thing is like understanding that the publishing industry is like really kind of corrupt. I mean, like it's like any industry. It's not about love of books. It's about money. It's about making business. It's about like, yes, the people who work within it, like the editors and the agents and the writers love books, but ultimately at the end of the day, you can have the best book in the world, but if you don't get that book in front of the right person at the right moment, when someone feels that they can make money off of it, it is never going to hit the shelf, right? Like that. There's a huge element of luck there. I mean, it's not always the best books that are chosen. It's about sometimes the person you know, or the person, you know, and it just being in the right place at the right time. And you can only control so much of it. Like you can write the best book you want, but a lot of it's out of your control. Like even working with an agent, like I find really hard because like I have this like person in between me and the goal, and like I have to, because you can't just like submit your book to a big 5 publisher, but like as a total control freak, it's just like I want to know every single thing that's said and things. So like you have to like give over some of yourself, and that's a case like a lot. Like you have to give over some of yourself to the agent. You're putting trust in that person to represent your career in the best way possible. I'm now on my second agent because things didn't work out with my first, which is totally normal. Like from whatever, like people go through 3, 4, sometimes like lots of them before they find a right fit. And then even once you sign with the publisher, you're still putting faith in that, like that editor and that publisher, that they're going to now market your book and try and sell your book. And which you hear a lot of horror stories there. Like there's just a lot of faith you're putting into a system that's like, you're just one tiny cog in the wheel. That's for sure.
So are there things that you've discovered that are better than, or different in like, oh, that's a total misconception that people just don't realize? Or let me ask this, has signing with a traditional publisher, has that opened doors for you that maybe indie authors don't appreciate? Like the role of traditional publishing and what they can do for getting your name out there, opening doors.
I mean,
I just feel like that's more of a thing than we want to admit that it is.
Yeah, I think there's an instant credibility that comes with it, whether we like it or not. I mean, anyone can self-publish a book no matter what, right? So and like even I struggle with this internally, like knowing like I know I wrote a book that people like, I self-published it, people are enjoying it. Like, is that not enough? Like, no, I also want I admit it. Like I want the like validation that comes from a big publisher being like, yeah, your book is good and we're going to publish it, right? Like, and seeing it in books. And there's a big misconception that like the minute that if you publish a book that it's going to be in bookstores, like that is something that most people do not understand, that is not how it works. Like, and that was big. That was an eye opener too. Like, and that there's a lot of different types of publishers where that, they're not going to be at front and center in Barnes and Noble. And that's only a fraction of books where that happens, right? Like that's not the thing. So I think ultimately it's a bit early days for me to say for sure, like if it's open doors, but I can see where that like people take you more seriously, whether that's right or not. I definitely feel like there's an element of that.
Well, and thank God that we live in a time where you have all of the options available to you. Traditional publishing and what they can provide, and indie publishing and what that can provide, and really we're living in a time where the author holds the power again, where
sometimes
but in a lot of ways you are in control of your destiny, or more in control of your destiny, because you can do the marketing things that
right. Which has sort of been my mantra for the last, like, I can't control if a publisher buys my book, but I can control me going on publishing on my own,
right?
And sort of like using that to like not feel like I'm sitting still, and sort of exploring, like, because my goal from like almost the beginning was to be like, I want this to be my full-time job. Like that was my goal. I did that a few weeks ago, as you know. Really since like last summer, other than like the bit that I was still working with you guys with, was the only thing I had left going on, and the rest was all writing. So I feel like I'm living a dream right now. Like I make my own hours. I mean, I work more than I have ever worked in my life, but it is all on my own terms, and it is all to build something for me, right? So it's completely different than any other job or anything I've ever done.
So you're self-publishing a series of romantic fantasy, and you sign a contract to write and publish a new romantic fantasy series, and then you sign a contract to write a workplace rom-com. How did that come about? I'll quantify that by saying that you hear advice from people in publishing all the time that says, once you find your audience, stay with that, do not deviate. And then
I think like romance readers are romance readers. Like I think the line across different subgenres of romance isn't too hard for people to breach. So I think like in that regard, it's not too big a deviation, even though it feels like it. I don't know. When my first book was on sub forever, I started I'm going to write a rom-com, because I had been reading a bunch of rom-coms that I liked. And I'm like, I'm going to write one too. And actually is centered around a woman who is an engineer who works at a corporation and deals with like sexism and casual racism, not at all based on my own personal experiences as a woman in engineering. Actually, I'm pretty excited because there's like a whole conversation that starts the whole book that like happened in real life, and I'm really quite excited to see it in print. Anyways, I don't know. Because my one book was on submission, my agent was like, well, if you want to put another one, we'd have to do something completely different also, because we don't want to go to the same editor. So that was sort of strategic in that sense too, because that first book was with, like YA and fantasy editors. Yeah. This one is now going to different imprints and different publishers, because it's completely different. Like usually they don't publish the same thing. So that was sort of strategic in that regard, and that like, well, let's see what hits first. Of course, then they both hit like within weeks of each other, because in the brains it pours, right? Like it's you wait and you wait and you wait, and then everything happens all at once.
That's so funny.
So yeah, that was kind of that. So that one will have like 3 books. I don't know what the second 2 are yet. Apparently, that's something they want to talk about. But
the publishing is staggered though, because
so the publishing has to be staggered. And here's a lesson I learned, is to like be careful with that. If you decide to be a hybrid author, is that because they all have competition clauses where you're not allowed to publish on the outsides of books, and it depends on what genre and what, like, you have to be. And I learned a couple hard lessons this last few weeks, but we have almost got everything sorted again. But yeah, and even like even the option clause, like most traditional publishing contracts will want to see your next they get to see your next book in that genre first. So if I decided I wanted to start a new series, I would have to then go to that publisher and be like, here's the book I'm planning to publish. Do you want to publish it? And then, I mean, I don't have to they can make an offer. You don't have to take it, obviously, but
right.
they have,
but they
like,
have to.
They have usually like a window to
Yeah.
respond. Like they usually have like 30 days to respond, yes or no, and then you have to wait till that's cleared out, right? So there, unless you would like them to publish, like most people want their publisher to publish their next book, but depending on the relationship and what your plans are, maybe not, right? So so there's that is something I have learned a lot about in the last few weeks is if you're hybrid, you have to be kind of careful about how things are fitting together, like, because they don't like you publishing other books too close to
So are you publishing both series under the same name, or
I
are
am
you developing a pen name? Okay.
I thought I would use a pen name for the rom-com, but they liked my audience that I had developed for the fantasy romance, so they were like, no, we want you to use the same name. Like, we want you to bring that audience over. So they're all going to be under the same name. We'll see how that goes.
That's great.
Yeah. I never liked the idea of pen names because it seems like a lot of work than to manage like 2 social media profiles and 2 newsletter lists and or multiple. Like, I know some people have multiple pen names, but like that, like I said, I'm lazy. I don't want to do research and I don't want to have to do multiple.
Right. Well, I feel like for so long that was almost a demand. We can't muddy the waters over here.
Yeah.
Keep them separate. And
maybe that's a change in the like indie landscape where and the people becoming hybrid and like there's sort of that overlap. Like, I don't know. Maybe if I decide to go a completely different direction, we'll come up with a different name. But I don't see myself doing anything but romance for a while. So
we had a question come in from Haley Carter. She said, as an author who is finishing my first book, what resources helped you get into the world of indie publishing? It seems overwhelming to me right now. We talked a little earlier about how you discovered TikTok and really had an audience there that resonated with them, and then that drove people to your book. Are there any other things that you discovered that help you to get noticed in this giant sea of books that are being published?
I mean, I tend to be a bit of a over researcher when it comes to stuff like this. Like, I read everything I could about indie publishing before I did anything. I think I know a lot of advice is just write the book that feels good to you, which is good advice. But if you honestly want to make money being an author, then you have to think about where your book fits in the market. You have to people do have success not writing to market, but you are just stacking the odds against yourself by not considering where does your book fit? What are your comps? Who are the authors that you're whose audience are you trying to attract?
Right.
The reason I think my indie series has done so well is because I really thought about that. My tagline is The Bachelor meets the Hunger Games. That is very clear what that means. It is 10 women competing for a man, but in a Hunger Games deadly style, right? And that has really resonated. And then the other one too is the book The Selection, which was a huge YA. But I've my other tagline is basically it's The Selection, but for grown-ups with fae and magic, right? So those two things have really done a lot of heavy lifting for me by being really intentional about what that comp is and what's that easy, people will know instantly what I'm talking about when I say The Bachelor meets the Hunger Games. There's no question what that's about, right? It just is instantly there. For resources, I would definitely say if you're not in the 20 books to 50K group on Facebook, there's so much good information in there.
Yes.
The people are very generous with their information there. I'm going to the conference in November, which I'm really excited to go to. I'm very curious to see what that's like.
Jacob and Robert from Dabble are going.
Oh, are they going to? Oh, good. See them there. Okay, good.
And
cool. That's
Craig
awesome.
Martell, who maintains all of that, has become a good friend. And
good.
he does amazing, top notch work, and that's definitely a resource everyone should take advantage of.
Yeah, I think to me, like, that's a really good spot. Like, I'd say Facebook groups are one place I learned a lot of things, and writing Twitter. I use writing Twitter a lot, not to market my books, but to connect with people.
Right.
To me, there's just tons of information there. I have met people. I'm in Discords with people I've met on Twitter that, like, where that information comes together. I would say, like, depending on your subgenre or your genre, try and find, like, there for sure is an indie group out there with your genre of authors working in that genre who are willing to share their share their information. Like, I'm in a fantasy romance Discord with a bunch of other, like, from everyone from, like, brand new newbies to people who've been doing it for decades, right? So, and there's, like, just a wealth of information and who are willing to answer any question you ask. So, like, to me, those are the two things you should look for: is go to 20 bucks 50K and find a group that is in your genre, because they'll have specific advice for your audience.
A mistake a lot of new authors make is marketing their book in the wrong places. Like, for instance, writing Twitter,
Yes.
or 20 books to 50K.
Marketing to other authors. Like,
Yeah,
don't market to other authors. They are not your audience. Yes, authors read books, but you are talking to them as readers, not as authors. Like, there's just, like, that drives me actually insane. TikTok, that is the mistake so many people make on TikTok. They make posts, like, of, like, writing issues, and I'm like, I get that, like, unless you're selling a book about writing to authors, like, drop it. Talk about your books. That people want to read your books. They don't really care if you are, like having tea with, like, I mean, it's fun to do those little bits, like, sides, and I actually think people don't care until they've actually are interested in your books about those things. Like, I'm not going to buy your book because you like the same kind of dog as I, right? Like, yeah, I think like that for sure. And writing Twitter, I mean, Twitter can do really good. I mean, you saw that, I don't know if you saw that with the This Is How We Lose a Time War that happened there a couple weeks ago. I mean, it can happen, but, like, that's a flash of lightning strike that was, right? So,
right.
Like,
exactly.
Yeah. Finding where your audience is very important. Like, for me, Instagram and TikTok make sense because that's where the audience is. They like the steamy fantasy romance. Like, it also helps that I write in a genre that is very popular right now. Like, but that goes back to, like, knowing where your book fits in the grand scheme of things.
So, Nisha, what does a day in the life of a pro writer look like right now? Where you are right now? What are you focusing on? And because I know when we're talking about publication schedules and edits and all of that, there are a lot of moving parts to getting a book to market. So, what are you working on right now, and what does a typical day's work look like for you?
Okay, this moment, I am trying to get my rough draft done for the third book in my Artifact series, which is my indie series, because I'm hoping to get out by the end of the year. So I have a goal to get it done by June the 6th, because then I will be expecting copy edits for my other series from my editors. So that will be a week of going over copy edits. That will go back to them. Then I will start editing book 3 of my series, getting it ready for beta readers. In between doing proofing and all that stuff for the other series. And then that will take me hopefully to the end of June. And then I will have to write book 2 of the other series. So that one is mostly written because it was originally one book that got split into 2. So I don't have as much work to do on that one. So that one's okay. But yeah.
And now you just have to make sure that one book has a satisfying ending and not just a break.
That I was starting to freak out a little bit, because I was like, we cut this book in half, and then, like, someone read it and they're like, nothing happened, and I was like, God. Okay, I'm like, so then I like
up and it doesn't go anywhere.
Like, oh God. So I moved the ending a little bit later, and then now I feel much better about it. But, like, I was starting to panic a little bit, because, like, just cutting a book in half is just, like, you just can't just cut it in half. Like, you have to really think about, like, okay, because now the arc has changed, and yeah, that was a bit of a it was a good learning experience. So that was good. And then a day in my life. I don't know. I don't set an alarm anymore, which I love, like that to me. But I mean, I'm usually up by like 6 or 6:30. Anyways, I have kids. They're 8 and 11, so I mean, they have to get up and get them ready for school.
No sleep late with them.
Yeah, well, the 11-year-old's turning more into a teenager. I have to drag her out of bed a little bit more, but getting them off to school. And then, yeah, I've worked throughout the day. My husband works at home too now ever since COVID. So We say hi to each other. We're on opposite ends of the main floor of our house. And I write for most of the day. I try to get marketing stuff like social media and all that done in the morning if I'm going to do stuff that day, like just to schedule a few posts and that kind of thing. And then my kids come home like around 4:30-ish. We have supper and stuff. And then usually I work for another hour or so, a couple hours maybe, and maybe just read before bed. And that's kind of it.
Love it.
Yeah.
Nisha, if folks are fascinated by your story or want to dig into your books, especially, where's the best place for them to connect with you online?
I am Nisha J Writes on everything, or nishajtuli.com is my website. Those are probably the easiest places to find me, and all my social stuff is linked there too.
All right, we will link it up in the notes to make it easy for folks to find you. Nisha, exciting stuff going on. I can't wait to see where it all goes, and come back and hang out with us again, please.
Yeah, anytime.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Hank.